Hello, everyone. Welcome into the Midnight Theater Kids with Erika Phoenix and today's guest, Joe Dieffenbacher from. You're in the UK now, right, Joe?
I'm in the UK, yep.
Yeah, yeah. Which part of it we'll never know. Um, so, so Joe
Different
is my
country.
guest today. He is a physical comedian, an actor, author of Clown, the physical comedian, and if there we go, we mine is backwards. Oh no, my Joe, my whole edition of the book actually came like this, and so I don't know if it's a printing problem or
It's a clown
everything's.
book. That's how it was written.
It was written backwards.
You're supposed to hold the
The
book up to a mirror to read it.
Yeah, yeah, it's an exercise in itself of being creative. Excuse me. So, yeah, I have Joe with me. Joe, you were my professor at in my undergrad for a semester, my intro to physical theater professor, and I have to say that is one of the times I fell in love with physical comedy and physical acting. And I could actually just blame you for me going to get my degree in
Okay.
physical theater and created and
I'm
devised
sorry.
theater. Shame on you! Now I have all of this student loan debt. No, I'm joking. So Joe, we're just going to have a lovely little interview, a lovely time. It may last 2 hours, 10 minutes, 10 days. um, but let's just kind of start because you've got a very interesting background. Can you tell us a little bit just about yourself and kind of like how it led to clowning?
Well, I started out as a art major, painting and sculpting. That's what I first studied in college. And I took a mime class kind of on the side and fell in love with the theater, fell in love with physical play. And then I was also working at a costume rental shop in Greensboro, North Carolina. And some guys were coming in, and one of them was going to go to the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Clown College. And I didn't know such a place existed. I didn't know you could get paid to be a clown because I was always getting in trouble for it. And I checked it out. This was before the internet, so I found a brochure about it and I applied. And when the circus came to town that summer, I auditioned. And next thing I know, in November, I found myself in Florida with about 45 other class clown types and studying slapstick and circus theater movement and all kinds of crazy stuff that I'd never had any experience before. But when I was there, I discovered that I had a natural talent for comedy, physical comedy, for the kind of slapstick that the clowns were doing there. And that's kind of where it sort of broke open for me. And that's when I sort of fell in love with clowning through the Ringling Circus, but through that whole experience of just studying physical theater.
That's that's so awesome. It's very beautiful that you started from a visual background. So seeing and then how that morphed into this physical experience. Do you think that there's an overlap between, having a strong eye or like having visual skills and something like physical comedy?
Absolutely, because for me, I sort of call it physical visual comedy. Because the research that I did about clowning, that kept coming up. Clowns always seem to be dealing with the visual world, how they dealt with their props, their costumes, the makeup. So it's very much a part of the style already. And I think that's another reason I fell in love with it, because I already had that eye for the visual. And when you're working with clowning or even like masks or puppetry, that's I also work with, it's like bringing a sculpture to life. And
Mm.
so when I saw that aspect of physical theater, it connected me back to that early training in art. And the reason I got into art in the first place is because I'm just one of those people who see things or understands things when I see them. I understand it
Mm-hmm.
visually rather than not so much with text or numbers. I'm not that sort of, is it left or right brain person. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think the visual aspect of clowning really struck home with me and connected me to that earlier. training that I had. And art was my first love. Painting and sculpture was my first love. So I guess clowning was my second love.
And yet they work together so well. And I'm sure the
Absolutely.
visual helps when you're doing directing work as opposed to, being in this space, but being able to kind of project outwards and see your body, or having that kind of awareness of the shapes that your body is making, and how it is moving through the space, the qualities, um, and all of those things. So you started with the Ringling Brothers. What else can you tell us kind of about your clowning, I guess, lineage? Have you studied other classes of clowning, or other, thoughts, other kind of, different teachers have very specific thoughts on clowning. Do you have a lineage that's very specific, or do you pick and choose from different modes or methods?
And when I first started out in the U.S., Ringling was the only place that was sort of known for teaching clowning. There
Mm.
became the school, the Lecoq School in Paris, and Philippe Collier's program, but those were much later. Um, so I didn't know anything about that. So the only style I knew was Ringling. But I was into various physical comedians on television: Carol Burnett, Tim Conway, Dick Van Dyke, all the old silent film comedians. So I was influenced by them. I think that my understanding of clowning mainly comes from performance, from just
Mm.
taking some ideas in my head, trying to create a show, and just over time making that work with an audience. And that's how I understand it. I'm not much for theories about clown or concepts about clown. I've been influenced by Gaulier and Lecoq's work, but more secondhand, because I had some teachers at the Del Arte School in California, and I studied with them for about 8 months. So I picked up some of that information from them, but
Hmm.
I still feel like my main influence was just performing in front of an audience with original material, and understanding
Mm.
that sort of alchemy that happens between the idea in your head and actually making a show work for an audience. Because, they're just standing there watching you like that. You know,
Hmm.
make me laugh, clown boy. And you've got to get past this, and you've got to figure out tactics to get around their sort of defense so that they let down their guard and they play with you. And that's
Mm.
a process. It's hard to teach in a class.
Yeah.
I do my best, but as I say, my main understanding of clowning, I would say my lineage comes from performing all over the world and figuring out how to play with different audiences.
Uh, I would describe. I was going to go in a different direction, but I think I'm going to go ahead and ask about like what is your clown pedagogy? How do you teach young clowns? Because this is a big part of, I mean, where you are now is, I worked with you, you were my professor, and the play was a huge part of our class, and yet it was structured so well.
I think when you do clowning, you have to be able to, as a teacher, I call it the balance between method and madness. You can't hold too tight to a method or pedagogy, because every student will bring something different to the class. So you've got to allow a certain amount of chaos in the classroom, because that's a part of what happens when you go on stage. You're improvising, you're playing with the audience. There's going to be things you don't expect. So for me, I said I want to get to the students to a point of performing and making a show. So what's the shortest distance between the classroom and that? I've worked with teachers who work a lot with concept and theory, but it was hard to translate that into performance. So for me, keeping the classroom a place where you're always playing, and as a teacher, I don't see myself as a teacher. I see myself as a fellow clown, as a
Mm.
performer. So I'm playing games with the students as a performer, not as a teacher. And slowly they kind of understand that dynamic, because it's very different than the traditional method of teaching, where I tell you this is the pedagogy, learn this. I'm saying no, I'm only a teacher because I know a bit more, I have more experience, but let's play together and let's learn
Hmm.
together. And that's a more dynamic energy in the classroom, which then you try to carry right onto the stage. So hopefully there's not that much difference, or there's not much of a shock from being in a classroom to suddenly being in front of, this guy, you
Yeah.
know.
The person who isn't responding, or the person who isn't, giving you that, how you break into that shell. So Matt's Music House in the chat is saying, the thing I know about Ringling Brothers is that Steve-O from Jackass trained there, which I didn't know. And then has asked, is there a lot of crossover between clown and commedia dell'arte? I think that for me personally, like having done the kind of the academia hours was kind of based off of Lecoq, the way that we were structured. And for me, there is, but a lot of it is just in presence. I mean, the two are definitely related, but if we're talking about like the Ringling Brothers, and we're talking about like living on the stage, I would say that yes, both of them do come from, they developed in the space on the stage, and it was just very different in the sense that commedia dell'arte, you had stock characters and stock ideas that they kind of kept coming back to. But I guess that there's probably a lot of overlap with clown as well. If you figure something out that works, like, you keep it.
Yeah, and I talked to an Italian woman who was teaching commedia, and she said historically all the commedia characters were clowns, and they've eventually got shaped into these specific types of the masks. But initially they were all Zanies, and the original clown in the UK was influenced by the clown or the harlequin in the commedia dell'arte. So there is a direct line from the commedia into clowning. And in San Francisco, when I ran a program there, we did 10 weeks of clowning and then 5 weeks of commedia. And one of the students afterwards said he felt like the commedia was the next level of clowning, because you had your body so much more, and you had to understand your physicality so much more for the commedia to support the mask. And then he carried that back into the clowning. Then it made his clowning that much stronger and that much more physical. So there's definitely an overlap. I just think, as you say, the commedia has sort of certain stock types that they work with, whereas the clowning is a more free-form style. When I started making commedia masks, at some point I rejected all the commedia characters, and I just made half masks that were more expressive, and said to the students, these aren't tied to any character. You invent the character based on your relationship to the mask.
Yeah, so here we can see that your commedia masks are all very different from like the commedia masks that I made, but still incredibly expressive, and a beautiful kind of like knowing you as a performer, knowing you as like your humor and your clowning. This is so uniquely your, I would say that like they're evocative of your body and your movements even. So it's really nice to see that. It's like this one here in the top left corner, is so lovely. It makes me laugh and smile just looking at it.
It is a fun mask to play. Yeah.
They're all so good. And you also have you've worked with masks of different kind of like characters inspired by animals. What are these made out of?
The material for the mask itself is something called neoprene, which is a bit like latex, but it's much more durable. And it's not as, some people have a sensitivity to latex, but neoprene doesn't have that for most. And then we, of course, build on top of that with fur and different bits and pieces of things. But they're all made of neoprene from a mold that we create. It's great stuff because it's really durable and it's easy to clean, and yeah.
That's awesome. I had learned about latex, and I've learned about is it like fiberglass, or is it different from fiberglass?
It's very different. No, it's
Okay.
it's more like with the neoprene, you make a negative mold and you pour it in. It's like a liquid. You pour it in, you let it dry, and then you pull that out. So it's not as weird or fiberglass. It's a
Hmm.
similar process. They call it slip casting. It's a similar process to making a latex mask, but
Hmm.
it's a different material.
Um, that's so awesome. I didn't know that that was an option for even making a mask. And of course, we've also got some puppets here that you've created. These monkeys are very good.
They were fun. They were fun to play.
Mm, um, so I'm getting distracted. I'm getting distracted. Hey, Leslie is in the chat. Hello, Leslie.
Leslie!
Hey. Leslie is asking, what about Balinese masks?
That's a good question because I have at Del Arte there were a number of programs that would go to Bali and teach students to make masks there with the Balinese mask makers. I've always been fascinated by those masks because they're so expressive and they have a lot of understanding of mask work because it's very much in the culture.
Mm,
If you ever watch the training in Balinese mask and movement, it's amazing to watch them, just the training of it. And they do a
mm,
lot of stuff with their eyes, just training their eyes to
mm-hmm,
look around. And that is so important. And if you look at those commedia masks, the eyes are so important in that to be able to play your eyes
mm-hmm.
well. Um, I think it's one of the strongest cultures of mask performance that is still around today. And I do wish I had gone back in the day and studied
Mm,
there. Um, but there it is. It's definitely, if you ever want to consider it, definitely worth the trip to go and be part of that. Because it's my understanding when the students who went, they were really enthusiastic because the masks were part of the culture and the mask performances were very much a part of the culture. It's almost like we would sit down and watch television. They would go in the evening and watch a Balinese shadow puppet play and mask performance.
that's incredible. I wish that I wish that going and seeing like because I mean people will go and see shows, but it's not always like something so because it's not necessarily so strong. Obviously, things like this in American culture, but then that's a whole question of like American culture is kind of a lot of different things, you know.
Yeah, and it's very much oriented around television and film.
Mm-hmm.
Because America is such a huge country, unless you live in a big city like New York or Chicago or Boston, LA, you don't see a lot of live theater if you're living in a rural space
Mm-hmm.
or a small town. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, I'm just pulling it up very quickly to show people just what we're talking about. And again, like, it's a part of the culture, so you can see all of the ritual around it, which we could argue that American. I'm gonna turn this off, the audio. You can kind of argue that American theater or any kind of American entertainment, like going to see a sports ball, has its own ritual. It's just not as the same. It's modernized in a different way, or it's a different kind of culture. But the rituals of things like the tailgating party and finding those kind of overlaps are very, very fascinating to me.
And I think also in American culture, a lot of that sort of thing is monetized.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
even the tailgate parties, they're also a lot about buying all the gear. So you've got all the team gear stuff going on.
Mm,
And yes, they sell masks in Bali, and yes, you have to pay to, see shows, etc. But it's not the same sort of monetization of culture the way it is in the States. Um,
mm-hmm.
and that's a shame. I mean, you do have things like small town festivals, Renaissance festivals, like what are they called? Like when they have
Ren.
farm country fairs,
Oh
country
yeah, like
fair.
country fairs. Mm-hmm.
These kind of things do quite well, and in a way have kept a bit of old vaudeville alive. And
Mm,
live theater that goes to small towns with these like Renaissance festivals. I used to do those in my younger days, and we played in a town called Waxahachie, Texas.
woohoo! Waxahachie,
And
Texas.
Waxahachie. Suddenly, people from all over the U.S. were coming and performing in this little town, and then people from Dallas and Houston would all come to this town, and they would just get exposed to all these crazy performers. So in a way, it's not that well known, but it's still a great way that it kept live theater going, small scale live theater.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've noticed with, especially with like drag culture, is cabarets are kind of coming back in a way that, or I don't know if they were like really left. I think that they've evolved. And it's really, really nice to see like small communal kind of performances, the creation of a cabaret from a group, which was, cabarets were a big part of the Accademia dell'Arte. We would, like, students were encouraged to put two on, and they always came from the students, and it was just incredible to see the things that people just wanted to bring to life. And yeah, I don't know. I'm losing the thread a little bit in my mind.
No, but to say is like you're able to create based on your ideas and develop things based on your ideas and have a place to present them. When I first started out, really the only thing for comedy was stand-up comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And someone like me who loves visual play and physical play, most stand-up comedy stages, they're not big enough for what I wanted to do. But so I didn't really have anywhere to turn to until I discovered the circus. And again, in America, the only circus was Ringling, which was for me was just a great experience, but just way too big. So when I discovered the Renaissance festivals, I said, okay, I can do this different kind of theater in a smaller scale. Then when I came to Europe, the cabaret culture in Europe is still hugely popular, you know, even more so than stand-up comedy. And I think the a part of what the drag shows have adopted in America is that cabaret aesthetic from Europe. And some of the cabaret shows in Europe have come over to the US and done tours. There's something called a Spiegel tent, which is like this circus type tent, a small tent. And they have like a dinner and a show. And that's part of an influence from Europe where it's still quite strong. I do a lot of work in those type of events.
So, Leslie has a question, but first also saying, I was so sad when Ringling Brothers closed. I understand there were problems, but it feels like a huge loss for society. And I agree with that. I think that it's very difficult for these huge things to kind of continue. And of course, like, we also have, it's its own beast, but Cirque du Soleil is, it does have clowning, but it definitely goes a lot towards the acrobatics, the the physical performance, the physical side of circus, which is also great. And I think that they can weave a story very well, but there's something that's lost, I think, in the grandness of Cirque sometimes.
It's a very high-tech show. It's very. The strange thing is, when I first saw the show, when they just started out, it was basically a bunch of street performers who suddenly got a lot of money to put a show together. And the dynamic in the show was amazing. And I just totally fell in love with it because it felt that the performers still knew how to connect with an audience because they'd come from street performing. And then it became quite corporate, it became quite slick. And now it's very much a kind of, it's still a great show, but it's also a bit of a machine. Like everything is perfectly timed. I've had students who've gone on to clown with them, and their routine is timed, so it has to be exactly the same number of minutes every night, which is okay, but at the same time, it's difficult for a clown who's playing with an audience to structure it that way. So for me, seeing it in later years, I almost felt like I didn't need to be there, that the show would still carry on because it was so perfectly technically choreographed. And that was totally different from the first time I saw it.
It lost that, what I think is vital to clowning, which is that connection between the audience and the performer, that space for breath. Do you think that Europe has more space for performance, or do you think that so between like the United States and between Europe, if someone is interested particularly in clowning or that kind of performance, would you say that Europe is probably a more welcoming place, or what would you say about the difference between the two?
It's one of the reasons we moved here because I saw what was going on in Europe and said, okay, this is where it's at.
Hmm.
Mainly because the traditions of circus, of clowning, of mask, of puppetry, of cabaret, they never stopped evolving and stopped being popular. Whereas in America, at a certain point, the circus kind of fell out of favor and it became all television, film, and then for comedy, it was stand-up comedy. Clowning was sort of like a bad word. When I lived in the States, I couldn't really use the word clown because it was such a negative connotation for a certain type
Mm.
of performer. Whereas in Europe, because they never lost those traditions, people have no problem with going to see a clown show, or they expect to see performers with skills, with movement, with different types of circus related skills, or a different type of comedy. And what I found was an audience in Europe, because they've watched a lot of performers like this, when they see something good, they really let you know and they
Hmm.
really appreciate it because they know what they've seen. You know, it's. I've done shows in the U.S. where afterwards people look at me like, "Are you a clown? And how come you're not on television? Why don't you do TV or movies?" And I was like, "Well, you know, what I'm doing is legitimate. This is live theater." Whereas in Europe, they would have never asked you that question because, again,
Mm.
it's still very much part. This kind of theater is still very much a part of the culture.
Yeah. Um,
It's changing. It's changing in the States, mainly, I think, because a lot of European performers or schools like Lecoq and Gaulier have trained American students, and they're bringing that back to the U.S. So it is changing, and circus is
Absolutely.
becoming much more popular, especially circus training schools all over the U.S., which is, I think, maybe the last 10 years, it's gotten more momentum.
Mm. Oh, definitely. I know that one of the reasons that I was really drawn to the Commedia dell'arte, and I even looked at the dell'arte school and just trying to figure out where I wanted to go, but it was very important for me to get away from some aspects of American performance, which are almost very Cirque du Soleil like in it has to be the same every night. It has to be, exact, or it has to be there's a certain amount of even perfection that is inherently um it's not that you aren't perfect when you're doing European theater, but there's room for breath, which I noticed that a lot of American, like, there wasn't the room for breathing in the way that there was in a created show, a devised show, whether it was clowning or if it was another style. It felt like it was its own live thing. I don't know where I'm going with that. Oh no, I lost you. I'm so sorry, Joe. Hold on just a second.
I see something there.
Hey, we did it. We did it. Yay. Okay. I apologize, everyone. Thank you so much for sticking it through these technical difficulties. It wouldn't be digital performance without technical issues. So thank you so much for hanging in there. Leslie's saying that the monkey sabotaged the connection, which I would believe. Look at that face. um so we were talking about differences between European theater or European performance and American theater. But I would like to kind of discuss this. A lot of people have these preconceived notions about what clown is, and it has a lot of, different, sometimes negative connotations from pop culture about what it is. How did you kind of deal with that? Did you have students who that was a barrier for them in America?
Yeah, I think most students who came to the classes that I taught there, they had that preconception of clowning. So the first week was just trying to get them over that. So either they thought clown was this way, and they would come into the class as acting what we called clowny, or they
Acting
didn't
clowning.
like clowning. They didn't like it, so they were really like, I wasn't looking forward to this 5 weeks of study. Um, or they really came in with absolutely no idea what it was. And sometimes those were the best students because they were kind of an open book and they didn't have to
Mm.
get past their preconceptions in order to play. Um, I for me, the clown is simply you at play. The makeup, the nose, the costume, that's a whole other thing. And that's more about a style you want to perform in, a look. But really, clowning is just that simple. It's you playing in a more expansive way. It's not an
Mm,
exaggeration. You're not a cartoon. You're simply playing in a sort of larger than life sort of way. So for me, the class was always focused on getting the students to understand the importance of play in all aspects of the work. Um,
mm,
and in the Europe, that's easier because again, they don't have those conceptions of clowning is usually in America, it's Ringling Brothers clowning. And it's the big nose and the squirty flowers and the big shoes and the wigs,
mhm.
or, twist balloons and that sort of thing. When I first made a show with a clown in it, I deliberately made the costume all gray and white and black.
Mm.
My voice was really deep, so I was like this all the time. I was like Tom Waits as a clown because
Yes.
I wanted to do the total opposite of what people thought of clowning, which was the high squeaky voice and the colorful costumes. So when I show up all in gray, black, and white and have this really deep Tom Waits voice, they would look at me like, "Wait, are you?" And I have a red nose and a bit of
Mm,
makeup, so they would be like, "Wait, are you a clown? What's going on here?" And so that was just one way to visually change their perception by just offering them something completely different. And the
mm.
clown was a bit more of like the commedia Punchinella character. He was a bit more ornery and just kind of like, you know. So that also was, he wasn't like, this sort of happy, bouncy clown. And so that also changed the perception, at least for my audience. Um,
Mhm.
and again, I was always looking towards clowning more as a physical, visual form rather than basing it on a particular look.
Yeah.
And again, trying to get students to understand. For example, when we did 5 weeks of clowning when I taught at Del Arte, the first 2 weeks were just about playing and getting physical. And it wasn't until like the third week where you played with the nose, if you even used the nose. So we took a lot of time just exploring the play and the body and the visual work before we even thought about nose, makeup, costume, any of that.
Mm-hmm. Um, so you've kind of answered this question of what is clowning. It's you, but at play. Do you think, or what are your thoughts about different people's ability to find play in their life? Or do you think that people who are not interested in becoming clowns can benefit from the ideas behind clowning?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I think anybody who walks into a class called, clown or teaching clown, at least comes in there with a willingness to play. And if the way I approach it is just, for example, the first day we'll just play a game of tag. You're it, I'm it, you're it. Very simple. Everybody knows this game. But you'd be amazed if you know what you're looking for, how much you can learn about a student from that game. Because they're not thinking about anything. They're not trying to present themselves in a scene like an actor would. They're just playing, and they expose a lot more of themselves in how they play that really simple game. So getting the students to understand how a game can be transformed into a theater piece. So for example, I tell them Hamlet, for me, it's just a game. It's an elaborate game, and the script is simply the rules of a game. So getting them to take a game of tag and evolve that into the idea of Hamlet, that's part of the process, but it's all based on play. And it's important to understand play is not something little kids do, in between classes. Play is a way of learning. And it's the way
Mm-hmm.
we all learned when we were kids. Before we started getting into concepts and words, we just played, but we played to learn about the world. And
Mm-hmm.
so in the classes, getting them to understand, the students to understand that play is a way of learning. It's not some sort of frivolous activity. It's a way of approaching the world where, here's an example. If you've got this bottle of water sitting on a table, and an adult will look at the bottle and talk about its shape and the color or the non-color, etc. A kid will come in and just pick up the bottle and start throwing it around and pouring water out of it and doing all kinds of things. And that's how they learn about the bottle. They learn about it through playing with it. An adult might
Mm-hmm.
learn about it with their head or with words, But a kid's going to learn about it through actively engaging with it, which is another way of saying playing with it.
What have you learned, or what do you learn about watching people play tag? Because we started every class like with a game. And this was common not just in my class with you, but like a lot of my theater classes. Play was the warm-up, either the physical aspect of it or, you know, the getting your mind and your body to kind of link up. So what do you learn?
Exactly what you just said. You get your mind and body to link up. And it's really, no, that's a big part of it is because we so rarely as adults play games. We play sports, which is a kind of game, but usually that's a competitive game, which I play competitive games in my class. Tag is a competitive game, but I also play collaborative games. I play competitive games where you have to lose the game, which is like a total bizarre concept for most people to think I'm going to play a competitive game and lose. I'm supposed to win. And I would say, I want you to go into this and deliberately lose. And they struggle with that concept. So with play, as I said, if you want to create a show, you simply start to play with this water bottle and you can start to develop ideas. And that's how you create a show. You don't sit and write it down as a script. You play with yourself, your costume, your body, all these different elements you want to work with, and you discover the show through play rather than through, sort of conceptualizing it intellectually. Not to put down doing that, that's an important part of a process. But the main part of the process is playing and making discoveries through that play.
It's kind of like building an inside joke with your collaborators. It's that you are creating kind of an inside joke that the audience gets to be in on. And who doesn't love that? Who doesn't love to be kind of like let in on, an experience or something, or brought into a new world, which is why we go and we see theater and we go and we do creative acts.
And if I walk up to you and say, hey, let's play a game, most people are like, yeah, okay, they have that kind of energy already. Let's play a game. So if you walk out on stage with that energy as a performer and you say to the audience, either directly or through the way you play with them, let's play a game, that audience is going to be like, yeah, we're going to play a game. So imagine if Hamlet walked out on stage and said, we're going to play a game. I'm the Prince of Denmark. Let's play a game that I'm the Prince of Denmark. If you can find that energy underneath something as serious as Hamlet, it's going to change the dynamic between you and the audience. But most people think, well, Hamlet's not a game. Hamlet's a very serious play. Yes, but games are very serious as well. The intensity with which some people play games can be quite scary sometimes, and so to get people to understand that games have many facets, many possibilities. And to answer the question originally that you asked about tag, in clowning, they have what's called a 1, 2, 3. The boss clown is the number 1. The fool is considered the number 3. And what I call the negotiator, the middle clown, is the number 2. If you watch people play a game of tag, there are some people who will gravitate more towards following the rules and demanding that everybody follows the rules. And they'll just do it naturally because that's their personality. And you, as a teacher, you think, okay, that person would probably be good as a number 1. Let's try that with that person. Whereas someone else who's a bit confused by the whole game and in an open, honest way gets sort of perplexed by what's going on. When there's something as simple as tag, you think, okay, this person has the potential to be the fool in a trio. And then the negotiator is usually someone who's trying to help everybody out and try to win the game for themselves, but sometimes help other people win. And you see that naturally come out in the game because it's a very simple game. You start to get this information about the students from the first day from that simple game. And most any game will give you that information if you understand it in that way, if you're looking at the game in that more conscious way, not just, hey, we're going to go to Joe's class and have a bunch of games.
Yeah. This question of play, you've done street performing, you've done kind of street festivals and things like that. How do you build a show that how do you go through the process of building a show that, and you've done solo performances, that's a part of it, that play with the audience or the engagement is a part of it. How do you build that?
Um, it takes time, first of all, because you've got to make the structure of the show. This is what you're going to present. But then you have to leave space for yourself to breathe with the audience. And usually most performers will do like an audience participation bit. The simplest thing sometimes is just bring a kid up on stage and you do something and you ask the kid to do it. And the kid will do it well, or they'll do it in some cute way, or they won't be able to do it at all. But that's usually an easy way to break the ice with the audience, is sort of audience participation, where you bring them up. The great thing about a street festival show is it's usually played in the round. Everybody can see each other because there's no blackouts or anything. And you're, as a performer, you're totally open to whatever happens, because you might be in the middle of something and a dog runs across your show, or pigeons land, on top of your props, or the drunks decide to invade your circus act, and you learn to play with that and embrace it. It's a bit scary at first, but once you get the feel for it, you realize that's sometimes the best parts of the show, because that's when the audience is actively playing with you, or they're sort of challenging you to see if you're present with them in the moment. Because it's not the thing you've rehearsed, and they know you didn't rehearse a dog running through your show. So they will see or pigeons. They want to see how you react, and you can play with that, and it's the immediacy of that with the audience on the street that is such a beautiful thing, and it's my favorite way of performing, because it's also democratic. Anybody will stop and watch your show if they're walking about. They don't have to pay a high price for a ticket, and you learn to play for a larger, more diverse group, and you learn to adjust your show as you go according to who's in the audience. And with the street show, you learn that sensitivity over time. I like to bring people up, and when they come on stage, immediately we are clown partners. So I don't treat them like, you have to do what I say and don't screw up and I'm the funny guy. I don't play high status all the time. In fact, I rarely do that. I come up and try to get them to play the clown with me. And if they're funny in that moment, I will totally support that and actually ask them to give me a break and do more funny stuff. And the audience, they love that, because this is one of their own who suddenly has this moment to shine. I did a show. I did a show in Germany once, and this guy came, it was in a town. They all kind of knew each other, in the audience. This guy came up, and it was just hilarious. And afterwards, all his neighbors came up and were like, "Wow, Johan, I didn't know you could do this, and you were that funny," and blah blah blah. And this guy was just red-faced and beaming, because he was suddenly the star of the village. Because he'd been able to just. He was given this supportive space to be funny and to be a clown and to play.
That's so beautiful. Those anecdotes and those little moments of lifting someone up, like amplifying their kind of natural humanity, because I think that all of us have the capability for play. It's so necessary, and it's like I got goosebumps just thinking about it. When the lockdown started, where did you turn your attention in your work?
That's yeah, it was pretty devastating, because I think of all the industries, maybe like the top three, theater was hit the worst. Most actors, artists are struggling anyway, and then suddenly there's absolutely no options for live theater work. My first reaction was I had a whole bunch of video from my years running the Clown Conservatory in San Francisco. So I put together all those clips, to kind of keep myself in it, to spend time with some clowns from the past, to watch them, do their funny stuff. And I edited a bunch of those to put on my YouTube channel. And I started to do some filming of different things to create sort of clown material for YouTube. And then I just started to develop new work, even though I had no idea when I'd be able to put it out there. I just thought I've got to be creative. I've got to at least invest the time and see where it goes. I did
Hmm.
some online directing and online workshops. Um,
Hmm.
so it was kind of a mixed bag, but it was really about just trying to, like a lot of people, just what do you do? Like nobody's ever experienced this before with our generation. How do we figure
Hmm.
this out? So
Um, yeah, that was it is definitely that we were all working to find new ways of engaging. And I just dropped the YouTube if anybody's curious about Joe's work. Um, and so you've done some workshops, you did some directing, and you've got do you have any shows of things that you've some full shows of things that you've done, or um yeah, what have
most
you
of the
what have
stuff on
you
there, most of the stuff on there has been edited mainly for YouTube because attention
Mhm.
spans. You try to keep it down to 5 minutes or so. Yeah,
Mm,
and if people request it, there I have access to full show videos, but normally I try to keep them more like edited down for things.
mm,
Um,
mhm,
yeah, so that kind of became my big project during the lockdown. I just really went a bit crazy with working with video stuff and exploring what was possible with the camera and physical theater. I
mm.
did a, I even did a cabaret, a couple of times, a live cabaret show where there were performers from all over the world doing like 2 or 3 minutes. And that was actually really fun. I really enjoyed it.
Did you do those on Zoom, or were they on a different platform, like it was straight to YouTube, or was it,
I
do you
think it
remember what
was
it was on?
Zoom. It
Hmm.
was a Zoom thing. So, there would be all these little squares for all the people who were participating and watching. And then the person who was going to perform would come up as the main screen. Then when you were done, the little squares would come up again and you'd get a lot of feedback. So for me, it was great because there were people all over the world watching the piece. So I was getting feedback from people in Brazil, people in Japan, people in Germany. So
Hmm.
in a way, even though I was reluctant to do it at first, I actually really enjoyed the back and forth with the audience because it was a global audience in that sense.
Mm. It's interesting the ways that the pandemic and the lockdowns, because we were stuck, in these very we were stuck inside, or we were stuck in one place. We had to find creative ways and creative solutions to connect with the bigger world. And I found that audience and connection, they became more diverse and more international. And I've gotten to speak to people about what they were doing, what they were working on, just from all over the world, and to get that chance for that kind of feedback. Whereas you'd have to get on a plane, you'd have to go, and yes, there's like a loss there, that it's not we're not sharing the same air, but there's still something to be said about being able to have that very immediate kind of connection. Um,
Yeah, people who would never have known me or seen any of my work, or
mhm.
I did some workshops who would never have been able to work with me because, like, I don't go to Brazil that often, were able to interact with me. And so that was a real gift, which was unexpected. But yeah, as I said, it turned out to be a wonderful thing.
Mm. Did you learn anything about the clown and camera that you can share with us? How does the clown go from living in a giant circus tent or on a street with people coming and going, and suddenly, like, we're in this almost static space, and you don't always get the verbal feedback. Sometimes it's just you looking at a camera and it's like, is this good? Is this anything?
Yeah, I learned for the cabaret to play more for the camera and also the frame of the camera because I treated it like a proscenium. So, you could be out of the frame and then make entrances into the frame. You could come in from up and down. And so I started playing with the camera the way I would a proscenium and make entrances in and exits, etc. Also,
Mm,
I treated the camera not as a recording device, but almost like a protagonist or an antagonist. Having problems with the camera and playing with this kind of focus and So I treated it more like a living thing rather than just something that was recording me. And that was actually
Mm.
quite interesting to play with it, uh, to actively engage with it, almost like I said before, like you would with a prop, to actively engage with the camera as a problem that I was trying to solve or to play with.
Mm. That brings up a lot of interesting questions because I always thought of it kind of as like, this is the vessel that gets my image to you. And I was imagining that you would say, like, what did I bring in, or what, like, into the physical space, but to make the connection to this space, it does change it. It changes it
And the
a
question of
lot.
what is not in this frame. So,
Mhm.
like right over here is the monkey, and now the monkey's over there. But the monkey's still, he's still. So you can play. It's a bit like playing with. If you're on stage, you play with what's happening backstage.
On stage versus off stage or backstage, and
Yeah,
um,
on camera versus off camera. Yeah.
it reminds me of one of the exercises that we did, which was, I don't remember the name of it, but you were the participant. The participant was, a very like cool like celebrity, or interesting person, and they made this entrance. We had to make an entrance, right? And entrances and exits in clowning, I think, are so vital. And sometimes in theater it's like, okay, that's it, you're on stage.
Yeah.
But this character would have to come on stage, they're very cool, and then the moment of realization that they'd walked into the wrong room or into a very tense situation, or like, that was one of my favorites. That
It's
was
classic. It's such a classic, exercise.
very good.
Yeah.
And you can find more exercises like that in Clown by Joe Dieffenbacher, the physical comedian. Um,
That was well
so
done.
playing. Thank you. Got to get those plugs in. Got to get the plugs in. Um, how? So we played with the entrances, the exits. You played with the camera itself. What do you? What changes, or what in your attention changes when you don't have the sound of laughter, or the sound, you can kind of feel it when the audience changes, but when you have a camera, or you don't have like a zoom, you don't have everybody's faces on Zoom, or maybe you do have that, how do you work with the different level of exchange of energy, I guess you could call it?
Yeah, that's a good question because I felt that there really wasn't an exchange of energy. It was more playing for the camera, as a presentation to a camera that an audience was watching. But in that Zoom cabaret, I could hear some laughter, but it was set up so that people would turn off their mics so they wouldn't all you wouldn't hear a lot of noise. So I
Mm-hmm.
could hear some laughter, but I didn't really know how it was going. But I knew the routine, so I knew the show worked as a routine. It was only like 2, 3 minutes.
Mm.
So I think in that sense, okay, I was just mostly playing as a show for an audience. Just here's the bit. Whereas if I was doing something live, I would be throwing something out there and listening and waiting and reacting to their reaction and playing with that. I think it would be really hard to take something new and know what you've got with this kind of technology. For something,
Mm.
for a show that you kind of have and you know it works, you can present it as a visual thing. But if you're trying to understand what you've created and learn about it through the audience's reaction, I think it would be hard to do with this kind of technology, like a Zoom thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I hadn't thought about that.
I mean, I've done it as a director, but it's more like the person would show me what they have, or the group would show me, then I would see it and then give feedback afterwards. But it didn't have that same immediacy that you get. I've done shows in the street where something happens and right away you're able to respond to it because you hear this reaction from an audience and
Mhm,
you
mhm.
know that you've got something that is working or something that's definitely not working, but you know
Right.
right away that it's there, whereas you don't really always get that on a camera situation.
Mhm. one of the things that I like about this platform, and I have it all turned off for this for our conversation, but on Twitch, and you can set it up on YouTube, I think as well, to send you sound alerts and to send you almost images on the screen. And I haven't played with it as much as I would like. I've played with the green screen a lot. Love to play with the green screen and change the setting and change the world. Like I've got this beautiful interview space that I've set up. But it changes it because I have the chat over here and I can look, and sometimes the speed at which the chat is moving kind of is an instigator for, or it gives me information that people are enjoying or not enjoying what I'm doing. And then sometimes the sounds I have to work with those sounds and the immediacy of them. Which is interesting to say because there's not an immediacy. There's actually a delay between when the chat hears what I say.
Yeah.
And so you're working, it's a very strange concept of time. So if you're trying to do 1, 2, 3, it doesn't always, it lands almost on the off beat when you're trying to tell a joke or you're trying to work with something. So yeah, I don't
it's just hard to get your timing. If you're working with comedy, it's hard to get the timing of a joke or the rhythm of a joke when that, like you say, there's always that delay in the response.
But it's interesting to think about is, can comedy be bad in that sense, or like can that rhythm be off and still be funny? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it can be. It's just a question of how, if you as the performer, how do you find out if that's working or not when there's that delay?
That's a good question.
If you know the Office, especially the British version of The Office, the TV series, they played a lot with the awkwardness of the timing of things. There wasn't a sort of comedy rhythm like you get in a lot of sitcoms. There was a lot of times where they just let something sit, and it would almost be painful, but then it would start to get funny. And I think sometimes the YouTube, the delay stuff, or not YouTube, but this Zoom kind of thing with the delay, you could play with that. It'd just be hard to figure out how the audience responds to it.
If it's like landing or how it's landing. So in this time of lockdown is happening, you're working on, YouTube, you're working on one-on-one Zoom things, cabarets, digital cabarets. Do you think that there are lessons that the clown can teach us especially like in this world where there's a lot of scary things happening or like overwhelming stuff? How can we find clown or the essence of it when, at the back of your mind, there's always these stressors. There's like a lot of worry or fear. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's a good question. It's a good question because sometimes you feel like in the midst of all that's going on, should I be playing? Should I be trying to find comedy? Should I be trying to be funny when all this other sort of negative stuff is affecting you? I find that's, if you can bring yourself up to it personally, it's almost like you need to find that playfulness. You need to find the release of just, the heck with it. I know there's a lot of bad stuff going on. There always will be. Let me just have this time to play. Last year, I played some festivals in Sardinia. And this was the first time since like for a few years because of the pandemic that they were able to get together. And people were so grateful and so happy just to be with each other again and watching shows and laughing, even though stuff was still going on. You could just feel the energy was so intense about this sheer joy of being able to feel joy again, and to laugh again with each other in the same place. So I think that people who can recognize that, the need for that, and let themselves go to that and just play again, it's crucial. It's so necessary, even more so now. because there's so much crazy stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, a clown approaches it in that way. Like there's a lot of stand-up comedy that goes out of its way to be offensive or
Mm-hmm.
cynical or insulting. And that's a style, and it seems to be quite popular. Whereas clowns don't really go in that direction because they want the whole audience to participate. So
Mm-hmm.
they're not trying to alienate one group or make fun of one group or insult some group. They're really just trying to get everybody to join in a sense of play because we all can do that.
Mm.
And so I find that clown humor is much more inclusive and embracing a much more diverse group of people because it doesn't necessarily pick out something very specific to make fun of.
Mm.
And I think people are recognizing that. I think clowning is seeing a resurgence in different ways of approaching the art form.
Absolutely. I think that it carries a different kind of humanity to comedy. It brings a different kind of humanity that you can do observations. You can do stand up that is about these observations, but when you bring in the clown, and I think you can bring in the clown where it is kind of still a stand up experience, um, but it brings a humanity or a humanness aspect to the humor. uh it almost universal, because who doesn't like to laugh?
Well, and also, like, I think we all have experienced failure or things going wrong, tripping over our own feet. We've all experienced that.
Hmm.
And when I find that no matter where I play in the world, when I'm doing that sort of physical comedy, it always gets laughs because we have different bodies, but we have a lot of the same sort of things we do with our bodies or the same sort of problems we have with the physical world. And so that's universal. It's familiar to everyone. They've all had
Hmm.
that experience. So I think it tends to be more easy to laugh together as an audience when you're watching that because, as you say, there's a humanity to it. It recognizes that we're all a bit flawed,
Hmm.
and it allows for that. It embraces that rather than, people get so worked up because they failed and did something wrong. And
Mm.
clowning says, let's make that an advantage and let's play with that. And I think that's
Yeah.
part of the beauty of it. And that's what's so attractive about it. No matter how many I hate clown memes or clowns are scary memes that are out there, people are still drawn to the art form because it embraces your human awkwardness.
Yeah. And nobody's perfect. Nobody is perfect, and clown acknowledges that.
Who
Leslie
wants
had a
to be?
Yeah, right. um so Leslie had a question about, so she did a workshop where they were encouraged to find their inner clown. Do you think that it is about a singular essence, or do you think one person can have many clowns within them?
I I always thought of the clown, and I tell this to my students, the clown is an agent of transformation, meaning the clown can be anything they want to be. The clown can be the Prince of Denmark, can also be a stop sign. The clown can be a water bottle, the clown can be a monkey. The
Mm-hmm.
clown can be anything they want to be. Underneath it is this feeling or sense of play. And play can go off in any direction it wants. I find this is my own personal take on it. When you say you have a unique inner clown or personal clown, that's a great thing. But the danger of that is you start to lock it into a particular way of playing for yourself. The clown should be able to go off in any direction because, as I say, they are able to always transform themselves because for them it's a game. It's a game to be Hamlet and then be Hamlet's dog, and then be Yorick's skull, and then be the shovel used to dig the grave. Like the clown enjoys being able to be all of those things because it's fun, you know. Um, so like I understand that idea of an inner clown or personal clown, but I think and that's important to find that vulnerability in that. But I think it's also
Mm.
important to realize or to not lock yourself into something too soon in your work.
Hmm. What other qualities do you think that the clown has or are important to have? So play, absolutely. But when you're on stage, how do you find that vulnerability, or what are the other kind of keys that can help you unlock that connection? It's
For
a
me,
big
the,
question.
the prime word I always use is curiosity. To me, the
Mm,
essence of clown is curiosity. And all the other things we associate with clowns, the vulnerability, this sort of innocence, their sort of childlike qualities, their awkwardness or clumsiness, their stupidity, as some people will say, all that comes from being curious. And curious is an aspect of wanting to play. I come out and I want to play. I want to see who wants to play. What can I play with? And curiosity for a student is more of a forward energy. It empowers the student. Whereas if I say, okay, come out and be stupid or come out and be vulnerable, that can be really difficult to find that in yourself,
mm,
especially in a class where you don't know anybody, you don't know the teacher. Can you trust the teacher with your vulnerability? Whereas if I say, come out and be curious, there's a pretty good chance you will show your vulnerability because you'll trip over something or you'll do something that was a little bit stupid in the moment because you're trying to find out how things work or you're trying to find out who wants to play.
mm,
So I always use the word curious as the starting point. And for me, that is the most important aspect of clowns. You have to be
mm.
intensely curious, like mad with curiosity. And that's how all those other things manifest themselves because of that.
So there are a couple of audience questions. Clown has no ego. Yes, Leslie. Uh, one of the questions one of the questions I got was, do you have an egg?
Oh, I know. I know what you mean. I don't have an egg. I never had a makeup style long enough that was the same to get an egg.
Mm-hmm.
That was the
Um,
big thing on Ringling was that you would develop a makeup over time, and that would be the makeup you would use, and you wouldn't change it.
mm.
And then that became the thing that went on the egg, and I kept changing my makeup because I was just I hadn't figured it out, and I was wanting to keep playing with it. So I never got an egg.
Aw. Do you think that there's still time for you to get an egg? Or are you saying no, maybe there's still time to change? There's still time to
That's the
grow and
problem.
play.
Because exactly, because there's still time to change, I'll never get an egg.
Aw.
When I
Um,
keep I'll have maybe like a lot of eggs with like I'll have one of those eggs where you take it off, there's another egg inside and another egg.
like matryoshka dolls, or
Yeah,
yeah, the
exactly.
nesting dolls. Um,
Exactly.
so for people who don't know, basically, if you developed your makeup for your clown, you would then paint an egg that had the same makeup, and then it would like trademark it. Is this? Am I? This I've I've never really.
I think it's in Wisconsin, in the Circus World Museum in Wisconsin,
Mhm.
where they have all these eggs of famous clowns. I think it's there, and I think that's kind of where it started and where they kind of that's the hallowed ground of clown eggs is Baraboo, Wisconsin, I think.
Baraboo, Wisconsin. Ah, incredible
That's where
name.
Ringling Brothers started. That was their home base, was up in Baraboo, Wisconsin.
Oh, I had no idea. That's awesome. The more you know with Joe. Um, oh goodness gracious. Another question that I had really quickly. How did the internet? I wanted to ask this and I forgot. How did the internet kind of connect you beyond Zoom, beyond finding new people? Did you find any engaging shows? Did you watch a lot of online theater or comedy or clowning, or um, what other ways did it guess kind of serve you during lockdown? Has it changed?
I use it as a kind of research tool. I found a lot of amazing performers that whose names I couldn't remember or pronounce because it was just like one video I discovered and it was maybe 3 minutes long. A lot of European artists that I'd never seen or heard of. who don't get like millions of views, but you really had to go and search for them. So I just, when I was working on the new show and I was working on some writing, I did a lot of research on the internet, and that was probably the most important thing for me, to have that as a tool to go and look mainly on YouTube, to look at other artists' work. Some from the past and some that was more current, that was happening, like a live stream, that kind of stuff.
So it worked as a tool, as a research tool, and it covered a lot of time where there were things that you could find from the past, things that are more contemporary.
Yeah, and a lot of that stuff's being newly digitized. There's like a British Pathe, Pathe, has all these things from their archives where they're starting to digitize them, all these amazing music hall and vaudeville performers that I'd never heard of or seen. And that's starting to go online. The same's happening in Germany and in France. All these artists who had been on like television way back then, that's being digitized and put online. So those were discoveries I made as well.
Was this a specific like organization or group that was digitizing them, or like if we wanted to find it, how do you know how we could look it up?
Well, the one I did find, like I said, was called British Pathe.
Oh, British
Um,
Path. Okay.
yeah, I think if you type in like physical theater, clowns, slapstick,
Mm-hmm.
old vaudeville or old music hall, so that stuff will come up. You have to keep looking, like don't go just to the first page, but scroll for a bit. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, I was just playing around with typing in certain search words that were specific to this work, and some words that were a bit obscure,
Mm.
and finding material that way.
Um, have you heard of a show called Nate by Natalie Palamides? Have you seen it?
I've seen excerpts from it, but I haven't seen the whole thing. She was in London a few times recently, but I wasn't able to go. But I've
Mm.
heard great things about it, and yeah, really good, really strong work.
It's interesting because it tackles like a lot of uncomfortable themes, and it's very confronting in the way that it kind of engages with the audience and brings up some kind of uncomfortable questions. Um, what are your thoughts on like a more kind of confrontational or like a different kind of energy for curiosity, where it's like the audience is almost engaging in something that could be uncomfortable? Um,
Yeah,
I think that
that's
yeah.
definitely. Go ahead.
I was gonna say it's different from like purposefully offensive. I think that it's doing some it's operating in a different way.
Yeah, I think a lot of that grew out of what's called bouffon, which is
Mm-hmm.
like considered another level of clown, a more like these were the outcasts of society, the people who had been ostracized and were sort of coming back and pointing out what's wrong with the society because they were on the outside. They could see it in a different way. So they were usually sort of considered freaks.
Mm.
Um, Natalie, her show is, I think, draws a lot from that kind of work. Buffon. There's another artist called the Red Bastard,
The Red
who
Bastard.
Eric Davis, definitely worth checking out. He was very good at popularizing that style of confronting the audience.
Mm-hmm.
The thing with Buffon, a lot of people study it, but it is what I consider like a higher level or another level clowning. So I would say like, commedia, I'm sorry, clown, then commedia, then Buffon is
Mm-hmm.
like a progression. And Buffon takes a real skill because if you're going to insult the audience, but you don't want them to all leave the theater, because you've got to
Mm-hmm.
be able to insult them and then charm them back to their seat, and that's hard to do. Um,
Yeah.
and but it is a very powerful way of interacting with the audience when you've got a crowd that's up for that kind of engagement. But you've got to be sensitive enough to know how far you can push it, or
Exactly.
or
Yeah.
if you push it too far, can you can you recover from it? Can you reel it back in?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. How do you recover from those moments? And it's not just clown. It's so fascinating to see the way that people will engage with work. I did a kids show, so taking a little left turn from Buffon. We did not do Buffon for the children. It was a kids show about bullying, but one of the actors does like a little improv where he sings like like something inspired by the school mascot, and he did Old Town Road, and he started to sing it, and then we were going to continue. The students, the whole auditorium sang the song, like continued singing the song like until it ended, and we're like, this is the strangest audience interaction we've had, because we're standing there and we're like, look at these kids are just gonna sing this song until it's done, so we have to be present with them. But we gave them that kind of time that you give people to participate, because it keeps them in the space. And it was interesting to have like the tables turned on us like that, where it was like, oh, we're the audience and they get to be singing like them now. Is one of my favorite things. Oh, did I lose you? Oh, I think it just dropped for a second. Let's give it just another second. Joe, no! I don't know when I lost you.
We were talking about bouffon.
Yes, we were talking about bouffon.
About the kids all singing.
It was great.
But don't you think the kids were then playing with you? They thought you were inviting them in, and they said, okay, we'll play.
They did. And it was an offer that they couldn't refuse, because it was interesting because that was related to their mascot. It was almost like they were the professionals. It's like, we know this song, we're going to sing it for you.
We'll show you how it's done.
We'll show you how it's done. Exactly. And it was precious. It was one of my favorite theatrical experiences I've ever had. Yeah, it's amazing how an audience can change, even just like what you've rehearsed. Because suddenly you can make eye contact with people. You can, give somebody just a physical acknowledgement that people don't always get, even in just daily life, especially not from strangers. So we were talking about bouffon. We were talking about how that's so different, and it needs a different kind of awareness to clown. It is genuinely one of the hardest kind of works. But you've talked about the different levels, or the different kinds of clowns. You've 1, 2, and 3. The person who's kind of going to push the game, and then the person who's in the sort of just the honest, the fool. Would you say that maybe there's a little link between the bad clown or the cop clown and the bouffon, or do you think that it's two different kind of things? Maybe I'm making connections that are not quite there.
No, I think, like I said, to me, they all share the same sort of lineage: the clown, commedia, and bouffon. I think with, like if you all start as clowns, when you go to commedia, you're starting to add character to it. You're starting to define the clown a bit more as a specific type at a specific time. Whereas with bouffon, the bouffon, in my view, has an agenda. And that's much more specific in their curiosity, because they're partly attacking the audience, partly trying to dig a bit deeper with the audience. Whereas the clown can do the same sort of things, but they stay open to the possibilities in that conversation. If that makes sense. Where the clown might say, hey, are you curious about this thing? Are you curious about this thing? Whereas the bouffon says, damn it, you're going to be curious about this thing. So it's a bit more in your face. And I find the clown can approach the same sort of subjects as a bouffon, but the audience is more open to go with them, because it's the difference between offering somebody and telling them this is what you should think or believe. So, and that can work. That can definitely work. But some audiences are put off by that, because they don't want to feel like you're telling them something or you're preaching to the converted. Whereas the clown comes sort of underneath your radar and says, hey, are you curious about this thing as well? Can you want to check it out? hey,
Mm,
it sort of
it's
invites you to participate
yeah.
rather than here's my agenda, here are my views. Either one works. Either one can create powerful theater. But for me personally, I find the clown can be more effective when you're working with an audience that doesn't necessarily agree with you.
Mm, exactly. I wish we could talk for 10 days about clowning. I clown gave me, I think, a gift. It gives anybody who engages with it a gift of honesty with themselves and an honesty to fail, which is very scary to do if you're not, especially if you come from a background where it's like, no, you've always gotten straight A's, you've always done the right thing, and suddenly you want to. But it engages a very curious part of ourselves, which is we learn through an engagement that's different from I'm going to observe this water bottle and I will know everything about it by my observations. It's like, it's very technical. If I put it down, it has weight. But to do that without words and to do it in your body is a different curiosity that it gives us a gift of time that I think, making a checklist of like, do I know everything about this bottle? What are the observations that you can't get that are physical interactions that are from curiosity, they come naturally when a person lets their mind just kind of wander.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of what play is, making discoveries through just engaging with something. When I teach, I tend to stay away from the word failure. I simply
Mm,
say, you make a plan and things don't go according to your plan. And that's
mm-hmm,
good. You've got the plan and you're going to learn from the plan. But if you allow other things to come into that, accidents, for example, accidents as opportunities, then
mm,
suddenly the word failure has such a weight to it for a lot of people. Whereas if I
mm-hmm,
simply say, well, it didn't go the way you planned, you didn't fail, you just maybe made another discovery. And
mm,
but that's the same thing that happens when you play in front of an audience. If I go out on the street and I say I'm only going to do the show that I have planned, the audience will start to drift because they
mm,
want to see if you're interacting with them. So here's my plan, but the plan is open for people to come into that. That's basically what you want to do in class and in performance. You have the show you rehearsed, but you allow failure or you allow accidents or things that you don't plan to be part of your show.
mm. How does someone go about being a clown? Where would someone learn about clowning? Maybe somebody who doesn't may or may not have a theater background or acting background. Like if they said, you know what, I'm going to learn more about clown. I want to be a clown. What are some resources that you would recommend besides your incredible book, Clown, the Physical Comedian, which has lots of exercises and pictures? I'm looking for a
Of
picture.
clown, of clown.
Lovely picture of you here.
Oh, there. Oh, that's me playing the clown.
That's you playing the
Um,
clown.
you know, the way that I started, which was just because I had no other option, was somebody asked me to do a clown thing at an event. I said, okay, I'll go and find a nose and to make. I just put together what I thought a clown would look like, but I had toned it down a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I just was at an open event with a lot of people, and I just kept my mouth shut, and I just started playing with them and improvising because of the makeup, the nose, the clown um, sort of character I was playing. People were saying, "Oh, he's a clown." Then they were open to play with me because of that. So that
Mm,
for me was the way to begin. It gave me access, the makeup, the look, and because I was with an audience, I was just improvising with people and discovering how do I play and how do people interact with me when I play. So I think that's probably the best way to start. And I still do it now. Like I still have things when I go to a festival where I'll just put on an outfit and just go play with the audience and improvise because that's where I learn and develop material. The photograph you showed comes from a show that started as me just walking around in the streets in that outfit with the mustache and just doing slapstick improvising on the street. And then over time, I developed enough material that I knew would work with an audience in an improv. and then
Mhm.
structure that into a show. So I think anybody who's interested in clowning, just start there, put on a red nose, put on the outfit that gives you that key or that access for an audience,
Mm.
and just find a crowd at a festival or some event and just play with them and see what happens.
Mm. So clown is something that it's not necessarily you have to have a tradition or a lineage, or you have to be, I've walked into the room and now I'm a clown, because I mean, that can help you unlock it, and it gives you other clowns to play with, which is, I think, a really good tool. But you can find the clown inside yourself.
Well, it's
In how
like we said
you,
earlier about just playing. The clown
yeah.
is you at play. So find a place where you can play and learn about yourself through the play in interaction with an audience.
Excellent. Well, Joe, I think that this is incredible. I'm trying to think of like a really good juicy question to kind of wrap it up. So my question for you is, what is your hope for clown?
My hope for it is that people begin to see it not in a limited way, the way it so
Mm.
often is with the red nose and the squirty flower. They see it as much more possibilities with the art form. It's one of the reasons I wrote the book. I wanted to sort of lay out other possibilities for people and say the clown is a physical, visual comedian, which then embraces all sorts of artists who would never have called themselves clowns, or you wouldn't, as an audience, call them clowns, but they're part of that group because they tend to use more physical play, visual play to connect with an audience. Doesn't mean they don't speak, but their main way of connecting is that physical, visual play. So I'm just hoping, as clown develops, that there are a lot of people doing amazing work as artists. I'm just hoping more and more people, as an audience, start to understand it as a much richer art form than just the limited look with the red nose, etc.
Mm,
Because I'll just tell
absolutely.
you one quick story. The cover of the book, the publishers originally wanted that look of the clown with the makeup with the red nose, and I said, I definitely don't want that. And we had to
Mm,
have a lot of a back and forth. And the photograph is a picture of a friend of mine, Dan Griffiths, who was my assistant at Clown Conservatory. And I just love the picture because it's just this guy being really strong and physical with his red nose and his jester's stick. And he's wearing an orange jumpsuit, which is the suit that you have to wear when you get in trouble in California. It's the orange is the new black. It's the juvenile delinquent's outfit that you have to wear when you have to go do time, when
mm-hmm.
you've done something wrong. You have to go clean the highways from litter. So it's just like there's this weird mix of things in that image that I thought I want clowning to be more just this physical performer, not necessarily this one look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's very dynamic. It does have color, but it's like bright, and it catches you. Even though, in as performers, we perform in black boxes all the time behind black or in front of black curtains, but the movement and the color of the picture, it pulls you in, and it's like, oh, this is dynamic. Ooh, haha. I wonder what the pages say if I can be that dynamic. Um, yeah. What have you got next? Where can people find you? Is there anything else you'd like to share about your work or projects you've got upcoming?
This summer, I'll be touring mostly in Europe with two brand new shows, which I developed during the lockdown. So that was a good thing that came out of that. It gave the lockdown and being unemployed kind of gave me time to develop work. So
Mm.
yeah, I'll be mostly touring in Europe. I'm doing still some online teaching and directing, which is more like if people get in touch with me to set things up. But I'll also be teaching workshops this summer in Spain and in the Czech Republic. So yeah, if you're
Awesome.
interested more in my work, just go to the website or get in touch, and yeah, I'm always happy to chat or help people who.
Mm-hmm. No, did we just lose Joe again? Joe! Joe, oh no! little bit about the shows that you've developed.
One of them is called Paperwork. So it's basically a kind of, if you know the film The Sorcerer's Apprentice, Walt Disney cartoon with Mickey Mouse, it's basically
Mm.
about a guy who goes to clean an office that deals with aviation, airplanes and hot air balloons, and he makes all these crazy discoveries with the paper about things that take off and fly and rockets that explode. And so it's kind of a slapstick uh, slapstick cleaner at the office of an aviation place that designs that. That's a terrible
That's
description, but anyway, that's the idea. It's a sort of slapstick at the office with a janitor, cleaner guy. And then the second show is called Yes, We Have No Balloons. And basically, I wanted to create a clown show and take all the cliches I hate about clowns, which is high squeaky voices, making balloons, and wearing these sort of big hoop pants, and make a show about that where everything goes wrong. So basically, he's come to make balloons for everybody in the audience, but all the balloons pop, they fly off in the air. He can't
Mhm.
make anything work, and it's just a kind of crazy mad show with this crazy mad clown who's trying to make balloons for everybody, but none of them work.
Mm.
So I just thought it'd be fun to take that tension and put
Uh-huh.
it at the heart of the show, the tension of all these things I don't like about clowns, and actually use them in a show and see if I could make that work. So it's been quite fun. I played it a few times last year, and we'll do it again this year on tour. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this year,
Nice.
this summer with the new shows.
Do you have the tour dates up on your website, or are they still in development, or?
I just put them on the website, so there's a link to a tour schedule, so that's all on there. So I
Excellent.
just got that up the other day.
Wonderful. Joe, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming and chatting with me about all things clown. It's so invigorating to be reminded that it's possible to carry this sense of play even into the digital realm, even into this world. And I think that clown also just teaches us to be gentle with ourselves. You can't be a clown and, you know, once you start to hurt yourself, it does move into this realm of the bouffon where it is working with the violence and the pain. You can work with violence and pain in clown, but there has to be the trust that the clown is going to be safe. I think that's one of the things that people like to see that sometimes. Sometimes people go to the movies or whatever and they want to see bleh, violence. You go
Yeah.
see a clown show. Sometimes it's like, I'd like to see somebody be okay.
Well, and they say that the clown, when the hero lands, there's the tragedy that they just land. That's it. The clown will bounce. So no matter how far the clown falls, they bounce.
Mhm.
So there's always that sense of I was going to say regurgitation, but there's always the sense of a clown of resurrection or resuscitation that they're going to, come
Mhm.
back and respond. So even in a dark show, like a bouffon type show, there's always that sense that there will be something human or human about it, because there
Yeah.
is that aspect of play and comedy. Yeah, not taking yourself so seriously.
That's what I want us to leave on. Is that we all have the capacity to bounce back or to give ourselves the softness and ability to bounce back and to be back into the world that is changing and the world that is shifting.
Hmm.
So I'm going to go onto a BRB screen very quickly, um, and just say a quick thank you to Joe for being here. I will be right back. Here we go.